Did you just have an incredible feeling of deja vu? Well, we've been through this congressional redistricting Texas two step before. And today we've got a political expert on New York State politics who's going to explain what it's all about and what it means, if anything, for the greater Western New York region. You're listening to the State of Greater Western New York report, which, as always, is brought to you by... Each week, our community makes history. Each week, you make history. And each week, there's only one source to turn to for the first take on history. You know what that is? Subscribe to the Sentinel right now to discover the history being made in your own backyard.
The Mendon Honeoye Falls Lima Sentinel. More than just your news, it's your history. Welcome, everyone, to this edition of the State of Greater Western New York Report. Join us each episode as we discuss fantastic topics ranging from history to science to the strange and the wonderful, as well as the treasured spirit with which our region has infused America. We challenge you to consider all things Greater Western New York, from our region's very beginnings to how it inspires, how it empowers, and why it is so admired. Here's the host of the State of Greater Western New York Report, Chris Carosa.
Hey there, and welcome everyone to this week's edition of the State of Greater Western New York Report. With us today is Bill O'Reilly. Well, not that one, but just an equally famous one, at least in terms of our book, who's an expert on New York State politics and has paid close attention to the congressional redistricting that we just went through recently. And if you're watching this live, recently meant yesterday. If you're watching this before, it meant in the end of the last week of February 2024. Well, Bill, before we start, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to be a strategist, a political strategist.
Sure. I typically say to people, I'm thinner and taller on Fox News when they meet Bill O'Reilly. It's that name was going fine until about the late 90s, and then he took off. But yeah, I've been working in New York politics most of my life. I actually had an uncle who ran for U.S. Senate in 1970, and I worked on his campaign as a little boy. And then really started in politics in 1986, working on a gubernatorial race. A gentleman named Andy O'Rourke was the county executive of Westchester County, and he challenged then Mario Cuomo. And I've kind of been in the game ever since, kind of PR and politics. But politics is always what's kind of made the palms perspire and the heartbeat. So that's the affliction that I've picked up, and I'm still going about almost 40 years later.
Well, let's kind of go over a little bit of recent history. A couple years ago, there was this bipartisan committee that was tasked with the objective of creating or redrawing the congressional districts within New York State due to the decennial census. And that district or that committee came up with new districts. It was rejected by the Democrats in the House and the Assembly and the Senate, and the Democrats have the majority there. They redrew the line, and then a judge rejected that. So a judge said, no, you got to go back to the redistrict lines that were previously proposed. That's what we have today. Until recently, again, another judge says, no, you can't do it that way. You have to go back and redo it. And we had the same thing happen. The bipartisan committee comes up with their lines, and the Democrats said, no, we want to do it our way. So first, Bill, take us on what this bipartisan committee is. When did it get formed? Is this the only reason for its existence? And why doesn't it have any teeth?
Teeth? Yeah, it's quite a journey, actually, and it goes back into really around 2015, 2016, although it was passed, I think, ultimately in 2019, the commission was created. It was everybody, all your viewers are familiar with gerrymandering, and it's one of the rules of politics, and it's, to the victor goes the spoils. And in heavy Republican states, Republicans do it, and heavy Democrat states, Democrats do it. And it's not great, but it's the way it works. And former New York City Mayor Ed Koch, in his late years, his great wish was to create an independent commission that could do lines in New York State that were as apolitical as possible. I mean, politics always weighs in somewhere. And so there was a ballot initiative put on, I believe it was 2019, and it overwhelmingly passed in New York State, where New Yorkers said, yes, let's try doing an independent commission comprised of Democrats and Republicans, and we'll see what we come up with. And so, as you said, at the decennial change of when every 10 years for the census, the districts are redrawn to ensure that the populations remain about equal among them around the country. And so the commission went to meet, and they met and they had a stalemate, and so it got kicked to the legislature. And of course, then the Democrats were able, since they control every lever of power in New York. I mean, they've got it all. They've got the governorship, the state senate, the state assembly, the attorney general, the comptroller. They've got everything. So they drew their own lines, and this was done. It was Governor Hochul was obviously involved, but former Congressman Sean Patrick Maloney, who was ironically defeated in 22, was really behind drawing the lines, and they got greedy. The Democrats got incredibly greedy, and even liberal newspapers, like, kind of, leaned back and were kind of shocked by how kind of audacious the Democrats' plans were. And so Republicans sued, and I should give a lot of credit to cosmetics heir Ron Lauder, who actually funded the lawsuit. And they sued, saying the lines were just outrageous, unconstitutional, and they broke all kinds of rules. It went to court, and the Republicans won that suit. And so the lines were redrawn by an independent judge. He put together a panel from outside of New York State to draw, competitive lines, and they did a great job with it. And New York, suddenly, a lot of districts became competitive in New York. That said, it wasn't like Republicans in Western New York, like Nick Langworthy's seat or Claudia Tenney's seat. They're relatively Republican leaning. The ones in downstate New York, Mike Lawler, Mark Molinaro, Esposito on Long Island, these are districts that, and even George Santos, who's now gone, those are districts that Biden won handily. Like, I'll say, in Lawler's case, I worked on that race. Biden won by 10 points, but they're still competitive. There's still a chance for Republicans, and Republicans won. They went in there and they won and did a great job, and the Democrats got very upset by it. So they decided to again, after the 22 elections, again sue and see if they could challenge. And in the process, they replaced judges that had been kind of leaning towards the Republicans. It really was quite involved, and millions of dollars were spent on this thing. They put in the judges they wanted. The new chief judge of the Court of Appeals in New York actually recused herself because it was such an ugly situation, didn't want it to tarnish her reputation. And so they put in another judge, and the Democrats got what they wanted. And so the Republicans again indicated they were going to challenge. The Democrats yesterday finished drawing the lines that they wanted, and just because of it turned out to be much ado about nothing, at a cost of, again, millions of dollars to taxpayers, because editorial boards around the state, the good government groups, typically that are on the political left or skew left, they weren't buying it either. And there was just too much pressure on Governor Hochul and on Hakeem Jeffries, the minority leader in Congress, and others to keep doing what they were doing. So they ended up drawing lines that were very similar to 2022. And ultimately, the Republicans announced last night and this morning that they will not be challenging the line. So we're basically back to where we started in 2022. With just we're short a few $1 million.
So let's explore this just for a second. You mentioned, typical liberal editorials coming out against this overreaching that we saw. I think one of them was the New York Times, if I remember, which surprised me.
It was.
When I saw that. And I'm just wondering, what do you think was the reason why they were complaining about what was going on? Because normally they'll be siding with the Democrats. Are they suspecting that there might be some issues with what in effect has become one party control in New York State? Are they fearing a backlash?
Yeah, I think a little bit, and I think the lines that the Democrats did in 20 or tried to push through, and many people expected they would try and do that again yesterday, and they didn't. They were so outrageously gerrymandered that I don't think the Times editorial board would have any. I think they would abandon any kind of moral high ground that they claim if they went along with it, because they're constantly, if you notice, a lot of the liberal newspapers are constantly bashing Republicans around the country for gerrymandering in Georgia, North Carolina. You hear it, Texas, you hear it all the time. And, New York Times has written so much about those and almost never touches New York because it's a Democratic state. But I think they were just so outrageous that the Times had to come out. The Daily News did it as well, which is another kind of populist left paper in New York City, and Albany Times Union. A number of papers weighed in on it, but it was so outlandish that I think it was just they couldn't stay credible without criticizing it. Even groups, for example, in the original suit that Ron Lauder helped fund, the League of Women Voters, which skews left, it's just not true. The League of Women Voters actually sided with Republicans and conservatives in that case. So it was, I think it was the degree to which they did this. And this was following Governor Andrew Cuomo changing the rules for third parties in New York, where he tried to get rid of all the other parties. The only ones that survived were Working Families Party and the Conservative Party. And like they've been trying to consolidate power for a decade in New York. They're using this supermajority they have in both houses to really try and kill all the competition in New York from the left and the right. Like they want to like the Democratic establishment wants to hold on to that power, and so that's what this is ultimately all about.
So one of the issues that came up, if you look at the reasoning why the Democrats rejected the bipartisan drawings, was that there was an instance where one of the congressional districts went into three different counties. So they changed it so there was only two. Can you tell us a little bit more specifically about what that situation was? And were there any other similar sort of three or more county congressional districts that they changed? Or was it only
Yeah,
this one downstate district?
that was one, but I think it was a little bit arbitrary. I think it was Senator I'm sorry, the deputy majority leader in the Senate. I'm just blanking on his name for a second. Apologize, but they didn't have a problem with three counties in when they were trying to put in the outrageous lines in 2020. When they wanted to change them in 22, suddenly that became a problem. So there are a lot of provisions and guideposts for redistricting. You want to, districts are supposed to remain as quote contact and contiguous as possible. They're not supposed, where you can avoid it. You don't want to cross counties or cross rivers or that type of stuff. And gerrymanders have used train tracks, all kinds of things to connect districts. But there are basic guidelines. I don't think that the three county thing. I think they just used that because they wanted to shore up Congressman Bowman's district, a portion in the Bronx, and so they invoked the three county rule in order to make that change. But it was fairly minor and not enough to create wide scale objections. But so I think gerrymanderists, if that's a word, will use the guidelines when it's to their advantage, and they'll ignore them when it's not.
So what I was wondering is the end result did, other than the one case that you just mentioned, were there other cases where the redistricting tweaks, I don't even know if you call them redrawings at this point, but let's say the tweaks where it clearly benefited the Democrats?
Mostly, like, really just the Brandon Williams district is one. They that one's a little bit better. Like Claudia Tenney and Nick Langworthy should be fine, and the rest of Western New York and North Country, there's there's almost no changes whatsoever. Brandon Williams district has changed a little bit to advantage Democrats by a small percentage point. The New York 3, which is that Santos district, Tom Suozzi just won that special election, and that will obviously, that's kicking into another race that I'm going to be working on for November. That went from a +8 Biden district to a +11. The Lawler district in New York 17 went from a Biden 10 to a Biden 11. Like they same with Mark Molinaro. That one, I think that went up a point or two. So no dramatic shifts, but nothing that helped Republicans. That the Democrats, helped themselves just a little bit on the margins here and there. But a lot of those races in 2022 were won by very tight margins. I mean, I worked on Mike Lawler's race, and we defeated Sean Patrick Maloney, who was the architect behind that outrageous gerrymander effort. And I mean, he won that by a point. So when you're shaving a little extra Democrats into the districts, it can make a huge difference. And of course, the elephant in the room is that these New York seats may be the deciding factor in whether Congress goes Republican or Democrat. So you're going to see an incredible amount of money pouring into New York, which you have in the last few years. In the I could just say in the Lawler race, I think it was upwards of $70 million, $70 million spent on a House race, and the same with the Swazi district, and you're going to see it again this year. There's going to be a lot of spending, not so much in Western New York because the boundaries are pretty much what they were last time.
All right. Well, Bill O'Reilly, we're talking to him on the State of Greater Western New York report. If you are watching this live and you have a question, put it in the chat and I'll try to shoot it over to Bill and see what he says. We will be right back after this message.
Through the mists of time, nature and man have both created and buried treasures beyond the imagination. With the ages, these riches slowly dissolve into mere myths until they are forever forgotten. But there are those brave souls who tirelessly cling to the truth, ever seeking to discover the undiscovered, to reveal what has always been there, to uncover the hidden gems of a land thought forsaken but loved by millions. 50 Hidden Gems of Greater Western New York. Discover the secrets in your own backyard. Buy your copy now at 50hiddengems.com.
Well, welcome back to the State of Greater Western New York report. I'm Chris Carosa. With us today is Bill O'Reilly. He's a Republican strategist talking to us about the redistricting situation going on in New York State. And Bill, just to recap, the bottom line, we have a couple questions, but we'll get to those in a second. The bottom line is we really haven't seen any changes significantly within the boundaries, just within the Greater Western New York region.
That's correct, and it could have been dramatically different. And it's, if you think about those puzzles where you move one tile to, those tile puzzles, if they had done dramatic things in downstate or Long Island or in the Capital District, it would have changed the configuration in Western New York, rather dramatically. But that didn't happen. They decided that they couldn't pull off, a drastic change, so they ended up punting. But yeah, so Western New York is going to remain pretty much almost exactly as is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's good for voters because you want competitive districts. Like, that's the thing, Chris, is that like these districts, like New York is now one of the most competitive states in the country in congressional races. Like, isn't that what we want? Like, don't we want and they're not, Republican plus 30 districts. These are very close districts, and that's where you get great representation. Where at any year one party can knock out the other, you're going to get better service and you're going to get a better elected official. So we want these competitive districts. It's good for everybody, Republican and Democrat.
Well, one of the questions that someone had was if the Democrats were able to do some slight shifting downstate to go from Biden +8 to Biden 11, say, doesn't that mean that somewhere else it might go from Biden 11 to Biden +8? Was there that kind of, is it a zero-sum game? I guess that's what they're asking.
It's not. It is a zero-sum game. Absolutely, it's a zero-sum game. But what they'll do is they'll park more Republicans in a heavily Democratic district, so that the Democrats not going to lose it anyway. Say it's a Biden 30 district next to a Biden 7 district. They can afford to put more Republicans into the Biden 30 district. And so they'll play with everything. I did it once years ago. I worked in the state Senate in the late 80s and early 90s, and I was in charge of redistricting for Manhattan. And it's a very interesting process. It's definitely a zero sum. I mean, you're in there and they have these computers, and I'm sure they're so much more advanced now. This was actually 92. So it was a long time ago. and like you change one district and all the demographics are there, white, black, Latino, all that, Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative. It's all built into the computer, and you move one little district, to one side, or one little ED, an election district, which is about 800 or 900 people, and all the data changes, and now you've got to make up for that in another place, and it's a really fascinating process. But yeah, but at the end of the day, we're looking at basically a stalemate. Basically, things are status quo. But yes, that the answer is yes. It is zero sum, but there's ways to park people in safe districts, and that's what they did.
Another question we had is really more of a national question, although New York is part of that question. So, as you mentioned, New York probably got Republicans 4 unexpected seats in this last election. That was enough to give the Republican the majority in the House. If the New York State congressional lines are being redrawn to maybe nudge it more into the favor of the Democrats to make those seats more competitive, maybe give the Democrats a better chance to win. And let's say that the Democrats win back those 4 seats. Have there been changes in other states' congressional redrawing that might give the Republicans the benefit for picking up Democrats, or at least current Democrat seats? What's your thinking
Yeah,
on that?
yes, but Most of that occurred. I think North Carolina is one exception, I believe. Yes, but most of it occurred 2 years ago. Like, you're only, even under the New York State Constitution, which was the argument of the Republican lawsuit, under the state constitution, you can only redistrict once a decade. And that's the way it is in really all states, because they're decennial redistrictings. And so there's not going to be much of a change in the lines in the other 49 states this term, because they were set for 2022. They're already done. You can't touch them. But sure, that does happen. You've seen it again in Texas, and whenever you see the New York Times and other liberal papers going crazy, it's always Republicans in those states that are doing it. Georgia, Texas, North Carolina are often the ones. Florida a little bit. But redistricting happens, so there's always accusations of gerrymandering on both sides. It just, you hear more about the Republicans gerrymandering than Democrats, because of the skew in the media. But yes, theoretically that could happen.
So, just going back to New York State now, this seems to be a continuing evolution, shifting away from competition, as you say. Maybe the congressional districts remain competitive, but it's harder and harder to get these statewide races competitive. And it's also becoming more of a challenge for the Republicans to even win enough seats, let's say in the Senate, to at least challenge the control that the Democrats have of the entire state. Is
That,
this is this a trend that's going to continue, or is there's a chance that it might break it?
I think, I'm a big fan of Rob Ort, who's the Republican leader in the state Senate, and he's been working really hard for a number of years or for the last couple of years, to try and take back some of those Senate seats. And there's going to be another big opportunity in 2024, this November. It's really sad to see what happened in New York. I mean, the Republicans held the majority the Republicans lost the majority in the state assembly in '64 during the Goldwater election, and it just got worse ever since. And the Democrats have had a supermajority in the assembly really since then, almost. There was one, they flipped back once, but they've had it forever. The Senate was traditionally a Republican body. I worked in the Senate in the '80s and '90s, and that was the Republican stronghold. We would have an advantage of maybe 5 or 6 seats. The Democrats now have a supermajority. It's I forgot the exact number. It's 63 seats, and I think there's 20 Republicans at this point. And so Rob Ord is trying to get back at least enough for starters. I mean, eventually he's going to get back the majority. I'm confident in it over time, but at least stop the supermajority, because that's where Republicans can't stop things like redistricting lines. If the Democrats have a veto-proof majority, Republicans really can't do anything, and that's what we've been seeing in these last number of years. But I think Ort's brought a lot of new energy, spirit, know-how, smarts, and drive into his job, and I think he's going to pick away seats, and I think that supermajority is going to be gone after 24, and then he'll get some momentum.
Well, one of the issues that people bring up is the fact, well, there's actually two issues. One, demographics, age demographics, where the older population that has traditionally voted Republican is expiring, shall we say.
Right.
And in addition to that, laws, regulations, policies within New York State are driving people out who would normally vote Republican.
That's
In
right.
fact, that was something I think a few years ago was almost a stated objective. Schumer and two others essentially said, "Hey, if you're a conservative, move out of New York State." Even Trump said that. Trump said,
Yeah, I mean,
"If
Andrew
you
Cuomo
now
said it,
Trump
right.
said
That's
it
right.
from a defensive standpoint. You shouldn't live in New York State anymore." And more people are thinking that, which in my mind at least, might make it more difficult for the Republicans to sort of claw back and break that supermajority at least. What do you see at that in terms of the demographics changing? Do you think that
It's a
maybe
great question, Chris. It's a
they
great question.
there might be moderate Democrats who might be seeing through the problems caused by one party control that might shift over?
Yeah, there's a lot of it's a great question. There's a lot of very interesting things going on, and you're right, and you know this better than anybody because Western New York got so depleted in the last 20 years. But just to, and people may know this, but since Andrew Cuomo was elected governor in 2010, New York State has lost 1.4 million residents. I mean, just an extraordinary number of people. And it's been, it's immigrants have come in, and both legal and illegal have come in to basically keep the population stable. But 1.4 million voters, and to your point, Chris, yes, a lot of them were Republicans, and they went south and they went west, and they're in the free state of Florida now. They got out there, and so you would think, and yes, the Democrats have taken advantage of that, and they've won a lot of elections, and we haven't even come close. The last close race, well, Lee Zeldin was close, and then Harry Wilson for controller in 2020. I'm sorry, 2010. I worked on that race. We got within a point, but it's been very difficult for Republicans. But there's something interesting happening downstate, and as particularly in New York City of the new immigrants. The immigrants coming in are a lot of Eastern Europeans, a lot of Central and South Americans, and a lot of Asian, and they're all coming from socialist countries. And those populations are beginning to skew Republican. You're seeing it dramatically in certainly in the Russian American population, in the Asian American population, Chinese American population. You're seeing in the city untouchable districts like for the Democrats beginning to go Republican, either outright victories or getting very, very close. Though there's like a new crop of conservatives, and I think Trump has something to do with it. There's a new crop of conservatives coming up in demographics that were traditionally Democrat. And so that's, I think, the hope for conservatives and Republicans. And anyone that will listen to me, I'm just a broken record on it. That's where we need to put our money into those communities, into saying, hey, we're here, we want to help. We understand you're small business people. We know what socialism does. We know where you came from, and you know why you came here. And we want to help you reach the American dream. That's where the Republicans can come back in New York, but it's going to take an investment and a lot of hard work.
And will the current party leaders, Democrat Party leaders, even acknowledge that there is that alternative point of view from constituencies that they generally believe are their?
That's right, and Chris, you see it in African American polling. Do you remember, like when George Bush was running HWRW? It was the elections were always 97-3 or something in the presidential election on the black vote, and Trump is bringing, I don't know what his number is, but it's in the 20s. I mean, it's extraordinary. He's eating into those populations, Hispanic populations. Like there's a lot. Dominicans were always traditionally Republican and conservative, where Puerto Ricans were traditionally more liberal. And I mean that, I don't mean the individuals. I mean as a whole. And that's beginning to change. There's something going on underneath, and it's very populist driven, and it really should be fed and watered by Republicans at every opportunity.
There certainly are changes, and it's going to be very interesting to see through this presidential election cycle how those changes manifest themselves and whether they begin to erode the Democrat control of New York State. Well, Bill,
That's
thank
right.
you for being here today. Thank
What a pleasure.
thank you all for listening. Remember, if you'd like to be a member of the live broadcast and be able to ask our guests questions, as they appear. You can only do that if you're in the live audience. Go to stateof.greaterwesternnewyork.com. Go to the bottom of that page there and just click in to register for free, and you will get an invitation every Thursday with the special super secret link that allows you to be a live member of our virtual studio audience. Again, that's the only way you'll be able to ask questions. If you would like to see shows like this, you can obviously go to the same site where the shows are archived shortly after they're broadcast live. But in addition, you can go to our Facebook page or YouTube channel if you like the page, the Facebook page, or subscribe to the YouTube channel. The show is rebroadcast every Sunday at 1:30 p.m. Those platforms will notify you before they are rebroadcast, or actually as they are rebroadcast. So that's all we have for this week. Again, Bill, thank you very much. Thank you all out there
Thank you,
in
Chris.
TV land, and we'll see you all again next week. Bye-bye for now.